Thank you, Mr. President. The crisis in Flint, Michigan, is a tragedy that was entirely preventable. This week, we have a chance to do something about it. Senator Stabenow, Senator Peters from Michigan have introduced an amendment that I hope, when we go back on the bill, that we will consider. As we do so, it's important to remember that as bad as it was in Flint, Flint's far from the only community in this country where families face exposure to dangerous levels of lead. In Sebring in Northeast Ohio, near Youngstown, we know there are troubling amounts of lead in the drinking water. Families are scared that their drinking water isn't safe. They're afraid they're facing another Flint. No parent should have to worry that the water coming out of their faucets might in fact be poisoning their children. Pregnant women shouldn't have to fear their tap water. In Sebring, just as in Flint, families were left in the dark about the safety of their water. For months, local officials failed to notify residents about the lead, and the EPA, the state EPA, failed to step in. I spoke this week with the mayor of Sebring. I spoke recently, just also this week, to State Representative Bocherry and State Senator Schiavone, representing Sebring and that part of Mahoning County, about what our response should be. This amendment before us this week will help put a stop to the failure in Michigan, the failure of the governor, and other places, the failure in Columbus. It appears to be the failure of the state EPA. It requires the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to notify the public directly if there's a danger from lead in the water system, if a state fails to do so within 15 days. No more arguing about whose responsibility it is while families continue drinking water that we know is not safe. No more finger pointing after the fact. This amendment says when there's a problem with the water, people have a right to know. It's the EPA's job to make sure that they do. The sooner we know about lead contamination, the sooner we can get to work to fix it. That's why notification is critical, but notification is just the beginning. The amendment before us this week will be just the beginning of our work to protect Americans from unsafe levels of lead. The Centers for Disease Control estimates that at least 4 million American households, 4 million American households with children are exposed to high levels of lead. We know what that does to their brain development. We know that impact it has for the rest of their lives. 4 million households in this country have children exposed to lead standards, even though we know it isn't safe. This problem stretches far beyond Flint, Michigan, and far beyond just our water systems. Corroded lead pipes are a major health hazard, but they're far from the only source of lead poisoning. Too many of our children we know are exposed to lead, mostly in older homes, mostly in lower income homes, exposed to lead through paint in their homes and even through the dirt in their backyards. Imagine that. The devastating effects of lead poisoning fall disproportionately on low-income children and on children of color. They're more likely to live in older homes closer to the city center and in rental housing that's poorly maintained. I've seen it firsthand in Ohio. The Plain Dealer in Cleveland conducted an investigation last fall. They found that some 40,000 Cuyahoga County children have tested positive for lead poisoning in the last year. Think about that. 40,000 children in that community alone have been tested for lead poisoning over the past 10 years, and they've been tested positive. Paint chips shed from molding in windowsills in older homes, turning to dust, easily ingested. Sometimes kids pick up lead chips and chew on them because they're colorful when they're small babies, when they're infants. Dust that's easily ingested or absorbed into toddlers' lungs. The danger hasn't subsided. 187,000 homes in Cuyahoga County put their occupants at risk of lead poisoning. That's why our efforts can't stop with just this amendment and can't stop just in Michigan, and they can't stop with just with lead in our water. The good news is we can combat this. We know we can because we've done it before. A number of my colleagues in 2012, Senators Franken of Minnesota and Casey from Pennsylvania and Merkley of Oregon, wrote to the EPA about the danger posed by former lead smelter sites in urban residential communities. I was in one of those neighborhoods, talked to people who had seen far too much lead in the dirt where their children play in front of, behind their houses. Because of our efforts, In some diligent reporting by reporters at USA Today, the EPA has acted to re-examine hundreds of former lead factory sites, helping communities address and deal with this stealth pollution. Think about this. You move into a home, you didn't know this neighborhood 40 years ago had a lead smelting plant that's long closed, but has contaminated the soil all around it. Your children play in it. You have no idea that soil is contaminated from that lead smelter that closed decades ago. We also have worked to combat the threat of lead in our children's toys. In 2007, Ashland University professor Jeff Wiedenheimer found that more than 1 in 7 Halloween toys that he purchased and tested through his classes contained dangerous levels of lead. 1 in 7 Halloween toys, most of them made in China, most of them painted by companies contracting with U.S. toy companies. Who's responsible for that? Surely the Chinese companies, subcontractors that put the lead paint on the toys, but certainly the U.S. toy companies that contracted with them and didn't care enough or know enough to check the quality of these toys. Following that shocking discovery, we worked with Professor Weidenhamer and other experts to pass the Bipartisan Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act in 2008, when Professor Weidenhamer conducted the same test on toys in 2011. None of them tested positive for dangerous levels of lead. So in spite of the fact that many people sitting in this body won their elections by saying government can never do anything good, government can never have an impact on our lives, government is too big, that's what government did. We passed a consumer protection bill in 2008. 2 years later, we found these toys that used to have lead paint. No, these toys, comparable toys now, don't have lead paint on them. So we know we can make progress when we work together and strengthen consumer protections to ensure that agencies tasked with our protecting children have the resources they need. We need to take the lead in our water, in our communities, in our homes just as seriously as lead in toys. It's not enough just to respond to the crisis at hand. We should do that in Flint. We should do that in Sebring. We should do it in smaller communities in Ohio with older homes. All of those things, but we have to. But it's not enough just to respond. Once children have been exposed, the effects can't be erased. We have to do more to help protect families from being exposed to lead in the first place. We did the right thing in December when we funded critical programs at the CDC and at the Housing and Urban Development that help prevent lead poisoning and monitor lead levels in children. But we can't stop there. We're seeing in Flint, we're seeing in Sebring, Ohio, we're seeing in cities across our country that current efforts aren't enough. Senator Stabenow, Senator Peters' amendment is a good first step. I hope we'll use this opportunity to examine what more we can do to protect our children, especially those young enough that their brain is developing and lead poisoning arrests much of their brain development and affects the rest of their lives. We have to do whatever we can to protect our children from the terrible effects of lead poisoning.